The hawk-like birds have sharp talons and hooked bills for tearing their prey. Oregon is home to 16 different birds in this category. They include the red-tailed hawk that can be seen flying high over open habitat all over Oregon. They have a wingspan of up to 52 inches and are very similar to the Swainson's hawk. The much smaller sharp-shinned hawk has a wing spread of only 13 inches, a good size to negotiate flying around its preferred habitat of forests and woodlands. The larger Cooper's hawk also prefers forests and woodlands. It, like the northern goshawk, has a wingspan of 33 inches and also prefers the diet of birds and small mammals. The ferruginous hawk is another big bird with a 54-inch wingspan that prefers open country. The northern harrier, seen here apparently thinking about lunch, used to be known as the marsh hawk because of its preference for living near marshes, grassland, and wet meadows. And then there's a turkey vulture, which with a 5-foot wingspan also prefers open rangeland. The American kestrel, one of our most common raptors, is quick to adapt and may have actually benefited from human activities. That's clearly not the case for the osprey.
To observe the birds diving, catching fish, is an exciting thing.
Today, more people are getting a chance to watch osprey at work. It's a remarkable sight. They're the only hawk that dives into and under the water to catch fish. Their large nests are easy to spot, right in the open in the very tops of broken-off trees. It's easier to see osprey than it used to be because there are lots more of them, and they've adapted to our presence. This nest is right next to the I-84 freeway.
Ospreys probably habituate to man much more than most of the raptors do, much more than bald eagles, certainly.
Chuck Henney works for the National Biological Service. The young birds lie flat in the nest when the adults are away to remain inconspicuous to predators. These birds are about 6 weeks old and already getting quite strong.
Now those talons look like they're big enough to grab you pretty good.
Yeah, he did.
The adult birds circle overhead and complain loudly. But these juveniles are old enough that our brief visit causes no harm. When Chuck began studying osprey in the 60s, they were in big trouble. There were few nests, and most failed to produce any offspring. To maintain the population, about one young bird must survive from each nest. In the 60s, that wasn't happening. But in the 70s, something changed.
Ospreys now on the Willamette River are producing about twice that much. And of course the population's increasing at about 20% a year. You know, these birds have probably been flying for less than a week. You can usually tell that by their flights are short distance. The landings are less than ideal most of the time.
And when they do land, the juveniles sometimes look a bit unsteady. But these youngsters have only 6 weeks to learn to fly and catch fish before the big fall migration.
And then they're off on a migration that's several thousand miles down into southern Mexico and into Central America.
The prairie falcon stays fairly close to home and prefers to nest on rock outcrops or cliff faces high above surrounding open country. And you can usually find quite a few of them where prey is common, a stark contrast to the endangered peregrine falcon. This 2-pound feathered bullet is nature's fastest moving animal, flying along effortlessly at 60 miles an hour. And when it dives for prey, it can hit speeds up to 150 miles an hour, earning the nickname ruler of the skies. But even the peregrine falcon's amazing speed wasn't enough to protect it from man.
As we were trying to get rid of our mosquitoes and other noxious insects in the early 40s, 50s, and through the 60s, using DDT, we didn't know that we were contaminating our environment and contaminating the food for birds like this peregrine.
Bill Haight, a biologist with the Department of Fish and Wildlife, says the falcon's prey was birds, small mammals, and reptiles that had eaten insects contaminated by DDT.
They started laying eggs with soft eggshells. and they just failed to hatch, and over time we saw fewer and fewer of these peregrines, and they eventually almost disappeared from the state.
20 years ago, the peregrine was on the verge of extinction. Only about 30 pairs were surviving in the western states. One pair nested near Crater Lake. Since the use of DDT was outlawed in 1972, we are seeing more of the falcons. But Bill Heinrich, a research biologist, says that ban came too late, that most of the damage had already been done.
In order to save the peregrine, which by now had become extinct east of the Mississippi River, we needed to form some kind of a captive population and attempt to at least, number one, learn how to breed them in captivity, number two, learn how to release them back into the wild, and then answer question number three, would these birds be able to survive?
Over the last 30 years, a number of sites, like this one at Cascade Head, have been set up to release the falcons. It's been a long process, but even though the peregrine falcon remains on the endangered list, its numbers are growing and they're learning to adapt to mankind, even to the point of at least one mating pair setting up a nest in downtown Portland.
February becomes March, and then April. And as in previous years, the falcons do build their nest below the eastbound deck of the Fremont. They mate there on the beams, 180 feet above the Willamette River, and tantalizingly out of sight. The female is a much bigger bird, the better to keep eggs warm on the nest. But the smaller male, the fastest bird there is, faces a huge challenge with a brood on the way.
He is the primary food provider. He will provide food to the female to show that he is a good provider. He'll bring her plenty of food items so that she's able to keep her nutritional level up as she's forming eggs inside of her.
The male and the female take turns guarding the nest ledge, a platform at the intersection of two huge steel beams. The pair has hatched 3 healthy female chicks. The Fremont size affords the birds the same high-altitude security they seek in the wild.
Peregrines are nesting in urban areas because there are tall structures. There are cliff-like structures in a city, whether it be buildings or bridges. And also there's a preponderance of prey.
Another month passes. The chicks are much larger now. Adaptability is a key strategy in nature. And adaptability has made the huge centerpiece of the Portland Harbor industrial area, a peregrine falcon home.
Our search for golden eagles led us to Jim Anderson, an expert on Central Oregon's birds of prey.
That golden eagle's nest is right close in here, and it's an old timer. It's been here for quite a spell.
His first stop is a cliff nest in Deschutes County.
The male spends a lot of time babysitting. The female spends her time hunting, and that's quite common for the birds of prey.
What's not so common is how the father bird stays on the nest as we get surprisingly close.
Very unusual, very unusual. The first thing that happens when you walk up on a nest like that, you happen to be there at the wrong time, why, pa-boom, they're gone.
The 2 eaglets are too young and too small to band.
They're about probably 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks.
So Jim will have to come back in a couple weeks for that. But he does find the adult's perch tree nearby.
No, that's a jackrabbit's hind leg. Jackrabbits are the #1 item on the golden eagle's list of prey. A baby eagle growing up, when he gets to be about 4 weeks old, will eat almost a jackrabbit a day. If there wasn't enough to eat, those 2 babies in the nest would be quarreling continually. One would be pushed out of the nest by the other.
Jim thinks the young birds at another nest may be a little older. Well, a little older and much bigger.
That kid is huge. So far, I only see 1 baby, though. Maybe they only got 1. That's why it's so big. For having all that down on it, I'm rather surprised at how strong it is. And he's walking around having a good time.
But this single eaglet, tended by its male parent, is also too young to band. We decided it was best to leave this nest alone and come back later. And look at what a difference just 2 weeks makes in the eagle's development.
Golden eagles grow so rapidly you can almost hear them grow. They consume enormous amounts of food at this age.
Jim works quickly to examine and band the bird and get it back to the nest.
Take a look at those talons, how long they are, and they're needle sharp. There we are. See how big that is? And this bird's only about half grown.
The parents keep a close eye on us, but don't seem to mind that their baby's been handled, since eagles, like most birds, cannot smell. But it's time for us to go and search for the more elusive bald eagle.
A storm growls around the marsh. After all, it is January in the Klamath Valley. Everything that flies seeks shelter. And our search for eagles suddenly becomes complicated. There may be 450 bald eagles here in the Klamath Basin, canvassing 90,000 acres in search of food. But where exactly they might be just now is anybody's guess. Another complexity: the sudden cold, harsh weather has made them nervous. They show us their white tails at the first sign of approach. Timidity, an unpublicized part of the bald eagle personality. Our shy star is about ready to head home for the night. The roost is an old-growth timber stand on the slope of a canyon due west. Hundreds of birds may be found in the same cluster of trees, the one time of the year the bald eagle tolerates company. Most of the time, the bird is as independent as our forefathers supposed, a silent and distant creature. A scavenger, yes, but a discreet one.
A few years later, we had better luck spotting the bald eagles when we headed to the lower Columbia River with Mike Patterson.
This is an adult female in the top of this Douglas fir. Oh yeah, there's the other juvenile right here behind us.
Mike teaches science at Astoria High School. His educating people about local birds is an extracurricular activity.
They usually start getting their white head in their 4th summer or 5th summer. That's about a 4th-year bird, though. It's just starting to get some white in the head. I've been watching birds since I was 13 years old, and up until the late 70s, finding an eagle was a really big deal in most of the state.
In fact, eagle numbers had dwindled due to pesticides in the food chain, habitat loss, and out-and-out killing.
They were considered a threat to livestock. They were considered a threat to the fishing industry.
But thanks to changing attitudes, and of course the protections of the Endangered Species Act, the bald eagle is back. There's also a lot of work going on to bring our last hawk-like bird and the largest North American bird of prey back to Oregon.
When Lewis and Clark came down to Columbia, they saw quite a few of them.
For 100 years now, the largest bird in North America has been absent from once familiar territory.
It would be awe-inspiring to see a bird with a 10-foot wingspan flying overhead in the Columbia Gorge.
The so-called California condor, shown here soaring thermals over Ventura County, California, careened to the verge of extinction. But now the Oregon Zoo is part of an expanding program to breed, release, and reestablish the endangered condor across the region. Zoo Director Tony Vecchio says the huge bird's anticipated rebound may one day mean a return to its ancient Columbia Gorge territory.
Lewis and Clark called it the beautiful buzzard of the Columbia, which is a much nicer name, I think, and the Native Americans for thousands of years referred to it as the thunderbird. So it's only been recent times that it's been the California condor.
The first condors to live in Oregon in 100 years reside under tight security in a zoo facility in Clackamas County. The breeding compound was designed with experience gained in similar facilities in California and Idaho. It strives to isolate the birds from human contact and is shielded even from approaching caretakers. The Oregon Zoo breeding program will likely supply birds for release in the Grand Canyon, Central and Southern California, and Southern Oregon. Someday the Oregon coast and wilderness areas may offer vistas like these over the grasslands of Santa Barbara County, California. Heavily populated northwestern Oregon may not provide ideal habitat for condors, but someday, Oregon Zoo Director Tony Vecchio believes, condors might buck the odds. They may again consume fish on the banks of the Columbia.